Creative Community Magazine, and we're here to interview Mr. Obbs here for his new book
Hmm.
that's coming out in April. I took the
Yeah.
wrong path.
Yeah. Yep. That's the book.
All right. So first off, let's start off with a very simple one. Tell me a little bit about the book. What's it about? How it came about, and how do you kind of feel after you've completed it?
Yeah. So like, I think just in an overarch, like it's about kind of like my personal journey with like ultimately like grief and stuff like that. Kind of like with losing a sibling, and also kind of just going through like these also like miniature griefs, we'll call them like in between, but mainly kind of like how kind of life has kind of like shifted from that, and kind of like what that journey's kind of looked like now, and in the present moment too. So that's kind of the overarching like thing it's about, just kind of how I processed it, how I processed it in like not the best ways, but the best ways still kind of led to the somehow like good ways.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't have to, it's just like that's just kind of how it works though. But that's kind of like what it's been about. And I've been writing. I think we were talking this off mic, but like I started writing the book um a couple months after my brother passed, like in February, March is when I started writing it. But I didn't have like a name for it or anything like that, or even kind of like knew what it was all going to be, because that's usually that's kind of like how my projects are and all that. It's kind of like I just don't know what it's going to be till it is. But I had this conversation with a friend last year, Jim Kiss. He's like a photographer. And I met him at this church that I spoke at for Black History Month last year. And like after I kind of got done doing my thing, like he was like, "Man, like I'm connected to you. You're cool. Let's talk and all that." So we met at a coffee shop, and like he's a super charismatic dude. Like just very like he has a lot of energy, and he like takes up space unapologetically. It's super funny. Like when he talks, we're at Theo's coffee shop, and like he was talking to where like three boots down could like hear him. He's just it's like he knew it, but he didn't care too, because he was just like in the moment and stuff. But
Authentic.
yeah, he's super authentic. So that's what I liked about him. But he said this thing that kind of stuck with me, and like I've always kind of it kind of just stuck with me until like I figured out what it was for. But we're having this conversation on just random stuff we were talking about, and he like said this thing where he says like he doesn't believe that like there's a said good or bad path like in life. It's like they're both not in the sense of like good means like you're gonna be fine and all this, and bad doesn't mean like oh you're screwed or anything like that, but just more so like that like there's a like regardless of the path, like you're taken care of regardless of where you go. Like one
Right.
path may be harder, the said like bad path or wrong path, like it's gonna be harder and unnecessarily harder than like it would have not had to been if you just went this way. But nobody's at fault for that. And he's like the biggest. He said the biggest sin is to not go down either path, and just like to just stay stagnant and stuff like that.
Right.
And like when he kind of like described that, like I just always kind of thought about it, and it just kind of made sense of like all these poems I was creating like post like losing my sibling, and kind of like going through all these weird like I shouldn't even call them weird, just these patterns that were like like not regular for myself.
Mm-hmm.
And like that quote just kind of like really stuck with me, and just making me realize like, yeah, man, I think I've been going down this said like wrong path for the first time ever, and everything's kind of weird and different and isolating and stuff. So
Yeah.
he kind of inspired all that, just him having that conversation. I don't even he's probably not even gonna know till he like sees that he inspired that. But that's where the inspiration of the book kind of came from altogether, just how I've kind of progressed, like I guess for like a better term, progress through this like this space of grief, and went down all these meandering paths, made mistakes and didn't make mistakes, and made mistakes, and kind of like figuring stuff out. And the book is just kind of like poems just on these reflections of these different parts in the bigger journey of just like what it's like kind of moving through grief and stuff. So yeah, that's kind of like what it is in a nutshell.
How does creativity help you navigate your grief?
Um, I think it's kind of like it's a
Is it cathartic for you?
I think so. Yeah. And I think just like for me, it's kind of like made me like being someone who's like a big like observer and stuff. Like I'm a any well back at that time I was like a Enneagram 5. I think I still am like a 5 a little bit, where I'm just like
Intuition.
Yeah, I'm just a big observer of life and stuff. Like I observe things, ask questions, like make judgments off my like assertions and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And like that's kind of how I make sense of life. But like when you kind of go through grief, that thing doesn't really work as well. Like because you can't really like make sense of grief and all that. Well, you can try, but I think sometimes you'll go like mad trying to do it and all that. And I think that's why some people kind of like numb themselves to it or tell themselves that they're okay because like that trying to rationalize it is like almost like scary, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, like writing, writing about it has kind of made me more like feel, I guess, like being okay with
Mm-hmm.
like feeling stuff
Sure.
and all that, and just being like being present in the feeling of stuff, and just being in the space of like not trying to understand it, but just kind of letting myself like express like my sadness, my upset, anger.
You're doing this.
Yeah, my humanness, for essentially.
Yeah.
And that's how my writing kind of changed. I think beforehand I was like a writer who just always wrote from this like observational like my coach, my poetry coach actually Ephraim Nehemiah,
Mm-hmm.
he's like a world renowned poet. But he said it best like during our coaching where he said that like with my poems, it seems like I'm here and my poems are here and the audience is like here as opposed to me being here with my poems and all that where he's like they're not really that personal.
Yeah.
It's like you're observing yourself but you're not letting yourself embody
An
yourself.
echo of who you are instead of you.
Yeah, so I think like post grief it kind of made me personally like accept or the invitation of just feeling, which again like not everybody goes down that either because again like kind of being a said like black male and all that, that's like not a norm. Like we're just kind of like, oh, we don't feel things, we just observe things and we cool. We may
Yeah.
cry a little bit, we're gonna thug it out, you
Yeah.
know. Where I'm like, no, I'm gonna cry a lot, I ain't gonna thug nothing out.
No, and seriously, so like you say you're seeking to kind of normalize that with this book, yeah?
Yeah, oh yeah, for sure. Because I've had a lot of like outside of like myself, like I've had a lot of friends who've lost like grandmothers, brothers, friends,
For sure.
family members, and like kind of seeing how they kind of go, and dads too, and kind of seeing how they kind of go about it. Like I know that like, or I hope, I guess I should say, not I know, but I hope that like kind of like how I share my narrative of grief through all the mess kind of like gives them a sense of like, oh, it's okay to be human and not like act like I have everything together. Or
Yeah.
it's also cool to just sit in my car and veg out for like 30 minutes and not feel like getting out because I don't know what to do with life. Like it's all part of the journey. So
Yeah.
yeah.
What would you say that you learned about yourself then in the process of putting this book together? Through your grief, through your creativity, what did you learn about yourself?
Uh I think that like what we've got to say it in a roundabout way, like that I'm human.
Yeah.
But it's again because like I feel like I think that's the biggest thing I've kind of like learned about myself in that in the sense of like where like I'm prone to like doing things outside of myself and all that because like I think before all of it like I was always a person who like made it an intention to like do good, to be like essentially too people pleasing too, and I feel like that's an aspect of me that kind of like passed away through kind of grief and all that, but more so, kind of being a sense where like I always made it an attempt to do good. And I think it's because the family I grew up in, like I grew up with both family members and like who are like super I shouldn't say super religious. They're not super religious. They're pastors and they grew up in like spiritual religious households and stuff like that. So like I was already living around like what it looks like to be have a sense of integrity and all that.
Yeah.
So I've always kind of been that. But then with grief, it kind of just like you lose yourself in it. So it's like all those things that you were, it's like, well, screw being like having integrity. I don't care. Like I just had some of that fast.
Yeah.
So it's like it's kind of taught me to kind of like sit with those parts of myself that I never have, like those parts of myself that like are who that lies to people, the part of myself that like um breaks promises, the part of myself that like gets angry, and stuff like that. And being able to kind of sit with those parts and just be like, well, that's don't shame yourself. That's just part of
Don't
the
beat
human.
yourself accountable for that.
That's you being human for the first time. Welcome
Yeah.
to this. So that's kind of like what the book kind of taught me, just how what it's still teaching me too, because it's like I'm still kind of in those spaces of like, dang, homie, you were like this or you did that and all that. And it's just like teaching me to consistently sit with that and be like, yeah, that's just part of the human journey. Like we're not good or bad. Like we're whatever on whatever given day. So that's the biggest thing I've kind of learned from it so far, really.
Interesting. What would you say, and this is that's kind of an off the cuff question, so
Oh,
I'm
that's cool with that.
interested in your answer really though. Who would you say has kind of been your biggest writing inspiration for this?
My biggest writing is oh for this.
Yes, aside from yourself, obviously, and like what you've been going through in your grief, what have you felt like? Whose kind of energy have you looked for like guidance, maybe a sense of like mentorship besides your actual mentors, maybe?
Yeah. It's funny because I've been listening to a lot of like just through the whole process of kind of like kind of writing this book, and I think I attribute it to the people was around too that contributed it to this as well. Like I've just listened to a lot of like old school like music I've never listened to in life because I didn't grow up listening to old school music unless it was like gospel stuff. Like I
Yeah.
didn't grow up listening to Curtis Mayfield or Marvin Gaye or Donny Hathaway or Isley Brothers and all that. I never grew up listening to that, you
Right.
know. But I feel like also I think Erica Badu was kind of a gateway to that some way too. But a lot of like a lot of the music that was a lot of the music that I was listening to at the time I was kind of writing this book, and
Mm-hmm.
I was watching interviews of like Marvin Gaye and kind of digging like diving deep into his story and stuff like that, and it's like man, like this guy was really going through going through it like a lot, you know. He lost people and went through grief that affected his art and his person and stuff like that, but those people were kind of like my mentors, I think, you know, the Curtis Mayfields, Marvin Gaye, Donny Hathaway, like Isley Brothers and all this, like they were kind of like my kind of like guides creatively and like as people and through what they were doing with their art that kind of guided the tone of this book strangely. Cause and I say strange because like I've never listened to these guys like on my own, like the chord. So it's like, you know, and now they've kind of just been a part of my life naturally now where I'm like, I listen to like their music all the time and am introduced to other artists, you know, from them too, you know. So they were kind of like my mentors during the time, you know, as well as the last poets, Gil Scott Heron, which again, like they're like older,
Mm-hmm.
you know, they're kind of almost in that same space where like they're just these older creators and artists and all that. So yeah, so I was listening to a lot of like old creators like who kind of came before me, and I think also kind of like what kind of was a trajectory to that was like actually sitting down with like those older creatives too, you know, like last year I sat down with Dr. Matabuti and all that, who was one of the forerunners of the Black Arts movement and stuff like that. And I think like just having all that naturally kind of come to me was like these guys are kind of leading me through this narrative in some kind of interesting way because they're poets, but they're like, well, yeah, obviously like Dr. Matabuti is a poet, but like the Marvin Gayes and Curtis Mayfields, they're poets in their own accord, but they weren't necessarily like, you know, poets, you know. So they all influenced me in a
Yeah.
really interesting way actually.
How has grief affected your spirituality? How have you progressed spiritually as a result of grieving?
Yeah, I think it's like one of those things where like we talk about grief like a mental emotional thing, which obviously it is, you know, it's a trauma, so that's gonna be like it's cerebral and that and all that.
For sure.
But I also hold like the belief that like from just like teachers that I read from, like whether it be like Richard Rohr or like Joanne Borisenko or like the Sharon Salzbergs and stuff like that,
Mm-hmm.
or like and Jack Cornfield, like all these like meditation spiritual teachers and all that who talk about grief in the sense of like, and almost all have this tone in a different way where like you have to have the spiritual components to get through grief. I was gonna say comfortably, but there's no getting through grief comfortably. You got to have that spiritual. I got to say, Thich Nhat Hanh too. Also was like in that group of people who I kind of read after, but like they all kind of had this like same undertone of like you can try to get through this in a Enneagram type 5 way where you're
Right.
thinking your way through it and rationalizing it, but good luck, buddy. Like you're gonna need more than that, and like to me, that's been the spiritual part. And I think again, like coming from a family who uh like found its roots in like Baptist, like Kojic, like
Mm-hmm.
church stuff and all that. Obviously, even though I'm not part of that religion, that spirituality still like is one that I kind of inherited. It just looks different now, you know.
Yeah.
So for me, like it's the spiritual part has been the like the necessary part because like it's like you can try to outthink grief, you can try to like tell yourself you're good, but like there's always gonna be something inside of you. For me personally, that's just like man, like there's something inside you that needs like these proverbial like holes in your hand like fixed fixed, not like completely like filled but just fixed, you know. Fixed is a word too, healed, you know.
Yeah.
So that component's kind of like been super important where like I've been more intentional about those practices, you know, like and like kind of like what they call mindfulness meditation,
Yeah.
prayer, and just kind of like just writing's a spiritual practice too, you know. And that so those things kind of have been like the things that kind of grounded me and all that through all the craziness. So I think it's like natural that those parts kind of just come up in the book because like those parts were like they kind of held me together and stuff like that. So you know, it's kind of natural for those parts to kind of like show up in all the poems in different ways, you know, in very different ways.
For sure.
Yeah.
What are three goals you have for 2025? This next year.
Mm, to continue to do what I'm doing now, um, and just kind of see that grow. I think that's always kind of been a goal of mine because like I'm always kind of seeing this thing of like poetry kind of progress. And it's like what I'm doing now, I'm like, I'm doing, I'm doing a pretty good job at it, I think, kind of seeing like the results kind of come out as they are. So it's like just continuing to be consistent in that really. And I'm learning that being consistent in that is being more kind of intentional about time, having more boundaries around my time is really focusing on like what's like here. Because I didn't do that in the past. I was always like, okay, we're gonna focus here, but there's this thing I gotta do, this thing I gotta do, this thing I gotta do. And like somehow I've still kind of been able to progress, but like now like the goal is to progress, but like be focused. Because the whole wrong right path ism. It's like if I go this way for a second, cool, but bring myself back to here, you know, even if I gotta break myself to from this, you know, and all that. So that's one goal. Just kind of continue to grow in the poetry stuff and even in the educational stuff too, just like with what I do with students and all that, because
For sure.
that's a passion of mine and like seeing that grow as well has been really, really awesome. But uh those goals and then I think just like a human goal, kind of like continuing to kind of like unpack my wrong path junk
Yeah.
and kind of like undoing that and kind of like fixing those things and stuff like that. Because
Yeah.
you know, I think that just makes everything else better. Like the art becomes better, the working with kids becomes better. The more I kind of unpack that stuff, so I'd say those are three kind of goals.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
feel like working with kids helps you connect to your inner child, which helps you connect to your creativity.
Oh yeah, because kids just you know
Yeah.
most kids. I won't even say all, but like most kids, like
Yeah.
it's like when it comes to like being creative, they just let themselves be creative. That's why I like, well, I like working with all grades and stuff like that, you know,
For sure.
elementary, middle school, high school. I think for all different reasons, but I like elementary and almost a little bit the junior high. I think like seventh, almost to eighth. Maybe
Yeah.
like the transition happens more in eighth grade, but like
Yeah.
maybe like, so I'll put seventh grade in there, like from first to seventh, like kids just, they don't care about like, they care, but they don't allow people's like thoughts about them to like limit what they do.
Right.
Some do, unfortunately, but for the most part, it's just like, hey, like we're gonna be creative, we're gonna have this idea, we're gonna do this, and like they're not stuck to this idea of perfection or even, yeah, I'll just say that perfection. They're not stuck to this idea of perfection that we get stuck to in adults, where we're like, oh, this got to sound this way, this got to look this way, this got to look this way. It's just like it's like, no, it doesn't, you know.
Yeah.
So I think that's why I like kind of I think that's why so to answer your question, like I definitely do believe that like kids kind of influence me to kind of like be that way with my creativity, you know, being an adult where we got to be in this adult world and all of that obviously, but like they still kind of put me in a space of like none of this really matters, like just create, like don't try to be perfect at stuff, don't try to like do this, don't just do it, and that's the fun part, that's where you accomplish the most. So I definitely attribute kind of like my being able to do that to being around kids because you don't really get that energy when you're around a lot of adults. Maybe
Yeah,
creative adults because like creative adults operate out of that inner child part of them and all
for
that,
sure.
you know. So I definitely attribute like that energy I have now to like being around kids and stuff like that,
I
you
mean,
know.
what was that like though? Like having to bring that energy not only like creatively while you were going through grief, but also to bring that energy to like kids in your organization. Like, how did that feel when you were face to face with that, but also face to face with grief?
Yeah, kids kind of snapped me out of it, you
Yeah,
know. I think that's what it was because like even like one of the poems in the book, like my conversation about death with the sixth grader and all that, like
yeah,
the conversation like that he was having with me was kind of like snapping me out of like, hey, like this thing doesn't have to be that gloomy, man. Like you're still here,
right,
life's still awesome. Like it hurts. I'm sorry.
yeah,
Here's a hug, Mr. Aubrey, but don't be sitting in that stuff. Like you don't got you, you know. So I think working with kids kind of like kept me snapped out of it, you know,
right,
because again, like they're just like they're ignorant to things, and not in a bad way, you know. It's just it's like an understandable ignorant, you know, just like I don't know how much this hurts. I might not know how much this hurts because I didn't go through it, you know, because some kids do go through like grief and stuff early in
for
there,
sure.
you know, but some are just like, I don't know what this feels like, but I know what it feels like to feel free from stuff, you know?
Yeah,
It's pretty great over
definitely
here. So it's like,
that relief to have.
yeah, they definitely kind of like, in kind of the writing process, I feel like that's why I've had like, even with the poems, like as heavy as they are, I feel like like there's a silver lining in some of them of like,
True.
this thing hurts, but hey, like stuff's kind of
There's
great. We
always
just don't see it all the way yet, but it's great. So,
which poem would you say, if you can think about the list you have so far, kind of encapsulates the book as a whole?
mm, dang, I want to say like the last one I wrote for it, the trauma wounds one.
Yeah,
I'm not gonna spoil it too much,
no,
you know. You already
you,
kind of know
you
because
don't.
yeah, but trauma wounds, I think for sure just encapsulates what everything's about in that, you know, in a very like honest, like unfolding way, you know. So that's probably, and it's one of my shorter ones too. That's the funny thing. It's like one of my
Yeah,
shorter poems. So
I think it works that way sometimes. It's just sometimes the realest feelings are just the shortest, most
yeah,
unfortunate thing you've ever said, but
no,
it
that's
has to be
true.
said.
No, it's true.
Things aren't understood unless you say them that way sometimes.
Yeah, no, that's actually true. I'm learning that
Yeah, yeah.
it's less is more.
But yeah, less is more. What piece then would you say maybe encapsulates like your progression as an artist through the grief?
My progression as an artist,
Mm-hmm.
mm,
Like maybe even let's go from like a technological, like a
like a
technical
writing,
level. Yeah,
like a literary kind of level.
yeah, for sure.
Dang, that is a good question. There's a few of them, but I think the one the most is the one that you mentioned earlier, the Pusher Man one.
Yeah,
You know, because it's more kind of like storytelling of a perspective outside of my perspective. You know, it's kind of like me, kind of like in a literary way, kind of like articulating stuff through this person that's not me, but
mm-hmm.
is me because I know what you know.
Yeah,
Again, what this emotion I'm going through feels like. Again, not kind of spoiling the poem, but
yeah,
yeah, I think that one, literary wise, it definitely kind of like was different technical from a technical level because again I'm writing this from the perspective of a song I'm listening to
right.
and learning how to take parts of this narrative that Curtis wrote while making it this narrative of like this emotion and stuff like that and kind of like making it work where like you know where it kind of like it's almost like a monologue almost, you know, sort of
It's
kind of
it's transformed a lot. I feel like because I feel
that
like I
too.
saw kind of more like earlier versions, and I've seen the progression of like what
Yeah,
it's become.
yep,
It was a lot. Like I enjoyed a call and response version of it, and I think
yeah.
reading it does translate more that way.
Yeah, and shout out to Ephraim Nehemiah if you're listening. That's who coached me in that because he definitely helped change around a lot of that to kind of make it more personal. So
Yeah,
I think that one shows kind of literary progression because it's me being more personal,
that makes sense.
but still kind of distant, but still personal. Where you're like, oh, I felt this, you know.
What would you say? Where do what would you say is the most, I don't know if there's, what would you say is the most important thing you learn not about yourself, but about dealing with other people
Mm,
through not only writing the book, but
yeah,
also through all the experiences that you've had in
yeah.
your grief?
I think and this is gonna be sound bad at first, but like that we're a lot of us are just very deeply traumatized and just don't know what we're doing.
Yeah.
And I think it's and I don't say like I think well I'm still kind of like growing in the sense of like I think I balance that and kind of meander between like people are traumatized and don't know what they're doing, so I don't want to participate in like being around humans all the time because that's exhausting. But then
Mm-hmm.
it's like, but also I'm exhausting too because
Yeah.
I'm also you know traumatized in that. But I think like the difference is like when you can realize it and accept it, where like some people just don't realize it and so they don't accept it. And it's just like I think just like writing this book and going through like the experiences that I have with like talking to friends, having really like peculiar encounters with friends who are like going through like traumatic episodes and like
Mm-hmm.
not themselves and all this and like
Your perception has changed.
yeah, it's like okay, like this is strange. It is like um does bring a sense of like nihilism, I guess, sometimes or apathy, but at the same time it's like, hey,
Yeah.
I'm also no different. So it's like it's it's been teaching me to like teaching me like and I say teaching because again I'm still painstakingly learning it's learning teaching me to give people grace and I have to because like again if I got to give what if I can't give to people what I'm not giving myself, so like if I don't give people grace I'm not giving myself grace because like
Yeah.
it's like if I'm looking at you like okay you're a traumatized individual who has problems and I'm going to treat myself the same way when I look at myself like oh I'm a traumatized person who has problems and then like not giving myself grace because I don't give other people grace in that. So it's really opened my eyes to that a lot, this past writing this book and kind of like teaching me like, okay, yeah, we're all this way. We all have like the proverbial holes in our hands and some of us don't know what to do with them, but I also didn't know what to do with it. And maybe 10 years from now, I'm going to look at myself 10 years from now and be like, he didn't know what to do with it. So it's like, yeah, it's teaching me. But again, I'm human. So I just get stuck in those places of like, humans kind of are interesting people I want to kind of stay away from. But you can't do that as a creative too. You can't write about life and be outside of life too. So I'm always reminding myself that too.
Yeah, you have to
You
experience it
gotta,
in order to.
yeah, and just realize you're part of it. Again, it's just like don't think that you're any special exception, sir. You're a part of this mess too.
Do you feel like you feel that way when you kind of look back at the things you wrote before? Any of the things you wrote before, or do you feel like, no, that was all kind of just like authentic to you at the time and like you stand by it?
Like the stuff that I've written, like do I stand by those things that I've wrote?
Yeah,
Or
or do you have this sense of like where you kind of look at yourself and you're like, well, you didn't know.
yeah, I think again I kind of meander with it because like I said, like it's like those things of like I struggle to give it to people because I struggle with it to myself where I'm like, oh, this person, you just didn't know. But it's like also like, man, like, how did you do this or that?
Yeah.
But I meander. So it's like, but I think it's a journey just trying to get in one space consistently. And you're going to meander and stuff like that. So
What's your favorite piece from this book? Just
that
blatantly your favorite.
blatantly my favorite.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that is a good question.
Yeah. It's like asking
I'd say honestly, I think the Judas prayer is my favorite one.
okay,
Now that I think about it.
interesting. And why though?
Uh, because it's probably like the one that I think is the most like stripped of like being like impressive technically, and it's just being like completely transparent about something without any like glamorous language to kind of like cover up what it's like like expressing, which is like this shame, this like sense of like fear of not being accepted, and just being honest in that. So I think I appreciate that's the favorite one out of that. It's just like it's different because I'm not trying to be like impressive. I'm just like, this is what I'm feeling right now, and I hope this is like real. So
Yeah.
I like that for that reason. It's honest. Not that none of them are honest, but like it's not tap dancing around anything. It's just like boom. This is kind of like the feelings in the moment.
Yeah. Do you feel like grief has um, caused you to want to be more present, as you said before, to experience life um, out of gratitude? Like, is that why?
Yeah. I think again, like I think it's a thing where like I meander to like I find spaces where I'm like grateful for obviously like grief's gonna make you I shouldn't assume that. For me, it's made me like more grateful that I'm like here in this life experiencing things. Yeah, things aren't always the greatest sometimes. I'm human. I get annoyed. I get irritated, but I also have these good days too. So it's like I find myself like in that space, but also like finding like solace in my like isolation, which like again, I know that like it's kind of double edged sword or like a yeah, it's like a double-edged sword where it's like it's good. I think like in kind of grief, you have that isolation period and all that, but
Mm-hmm.
also it's also kind of like me just being like I just don't want to feel a lot of things because I'm feeling a lot of things, so I don't want to be around people because I feel a lot of things.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I kind of like I think I meander between both, but like I think gratitude's in both of them actually. 'Cause there's gratitude and the solace and gratitude was not always in the present moment, not always in the present moment
Mm-hmm.
but just gratitude and like just being here amongst people figuring it out, still.
Definitely.
Yeah.
What's one piece of advice you give an artist or a writer pursuing publishing for the first time?
Oh, literally do it the easiest way that you can and just do it. Like I think that's the biggest thing. I think like and I don't want to assume this about everybody, but I think like when we think about art, when it comes to literary arts and all that, um, we get stuck on the perfection part. We want the little number in the corner to be perfect. We want the heading to be perfect. We want this part to be perfect. We want this to be perfect. We want the cover to be perfect. We want all this to be timed out and certain. It's just like you're wasting time with that, man. Like when I wrote my first book, I literally just took a whole bunch of poems, just put them in a book. And it was like, boom, here. That's literally all I did. The second one, I was like, okay, this was a little bit more focused. The second one, but boom, here. The third one, it became a little bit more focused, a lot more focused, actually, 10 times more focused, I say.
Yeah.
As like these all have like a common theme here. But like, I think just starting by just doing, don't even think about things like, cause you get like, it's kind of like manifestation calls for like a sense of you got to have boundaries, you got to have like limitations,
For sure.
but also like just do it. Don't give yourself too much limitations where you're not just like releasing something. So, it's like what I kind of say, just don't get stuck. Don't get stuck in perfection. Like it's perfect's not a destination. It's just like a journey, and like your first thing's probably not gonna.
Perfection is erasure.
Yes, like
They say.
Bean said that.
Being said that.
Poet laureate of Houston, Texas. But yeah, that's what it is. Poet like perfection's erasure. It's just like just do it and don't think too much about it. Like
Someone needs to hear it.
yeah, and figure it out. Like you're gonna figure it out as you go. Like my first book had errors in it. My second book had errors in it. My third one, you would think it'd be said perfect, but it had errors in it. But it's just like, but I put those out though.
Yeah,
I
it's
put
up
them
to
out,
you.
and people. I have friends who are like not even friends, people who like I encountered who like were in prison and like read my book and like said it got them to this space. And like I have friends who like were going through dark times and said it got them to this. And it's like that wouldn't have got there if I would have just sat and been like, okay, I have to make sure this is perfect. So like, no, just you got to jump off the proverbial cliff and just let it be. Have your idea, have your title. If you like having that thing first, have your poems. And I don't say I'm not saying don't edit your work and don't make sure it's like clean like that, but like don't get so hung up on it where you're like working on it for 4 years, and all of a sudden it's just like 4 years passed, man. So my biggest thing is like just do it, and perfection's the journey and not the destination.
Right.
Yeah,
People place that.
yeah.
What are your next moves for this year? What are your upcoming projects? What are you doing? Where are you going to be at? Tell the people all the
Yeah.
things.
Well, I guess like since this interview is around the book, like it's the big thing. It's just the book, which is coming out April 11th. We said it's like 11th, right? 11th. Yeah.
That's on you.
April 11th.
Yeah.
Um, is when the book comes out, and that's kind of been my biggest focus. Is kind of like focus my energy around that, and kind of making sure like I have the projects I work on are kind of like all in
Encapsulating.
encapsulating of the book. I'm trying to do a better job of like putting out something and like keeping my energy there as opposed to being like, okay, this is done. Next thing, it's like, no, let's keep our energy here and like
Yeah.
figure out how we can kind of like express this in multiple ways. So it's gonna be a project I focus on because of just like what it's about, mental wellness, grief, and my journey with it, and an honest journey. So that's my biggest focus this next year, and doing everything educationally. So
Right. So,
those things.
April 11th.
Mm-hmm.
Hit the wrong path.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure we'll find it online, all the
Yep.
places.
Mm-hmm.
Yourself. Where can the people find you?
Yep. Mr. Obbs, MisterAubs on Instagram. That's like the biggest thing that I kind of operate from. I have a website. We just haven't like, it's still in construction. It's in progress.
Getting there.
So www.mraubs.com, and hopefully by like the time the book's out, we have that space to kind of like,
Merch,
hmm
bookmarks, all good stuff.
yep, all that stuff. So yeah, that's where a lot of my stuff can be found.